Good evening, and welcome to our special broadcast. Tonight, we delve into a profoundly significant and often contentious question. Is systemic racism irremediably embedded within the U.S. justice system? Joining us to dissect this multifaceted issue are two distinguished legal minds. Mr. David Chen, a dedicated civil rights lawyer, who will argue in favor of the proposition. Ms. Sarah Miller, a former prosecutor and respected legal analyst, who will contend that the complexities of observed disparities extend beyond a singular explanation of systemic racism.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. The assertion I put forth this evening is unequivocal. Systemic racism is not a mere peripheral anomaly within the U.S. justice system. It is an intrinsic, pervasive, and undeniable characteristic of its very architecture. To comprehend its current manifestations, one must acknowledge the direct lineage from the abhorrent institutions of slavery and the subsequent era of Jim Crow segregation. These historical injustices, far from being relics of a distant past, have meticulously laid the foundational structures upon which contemporary policing strategies, prosecutorial decisions, and judicial outcomes are frequently built. Consider the staggering statistical disparities that paint a grim picture. Individuals from minority communities, particularly Black Americans, face disproportionately higher rates of arrest for identical offenses when compared to their white counterparts. Furthermore, once arrested, they are often subjected to more severe charges, encounter greater obstacles in securing pretrial release, and ultimately receive lengthier and harsher sentences. This isn't conjecture. It's a reality substantiated by voluminous data from numerous credible sources, including governmental reports and academic studies. Beyond overt acts of discrimination, which regrettably still occur, the insidious influence of implicit bias permeates the system. Law enforcement officers, prosecutors, judges, and even jury members, like all individuals, harbor unconscious biases that can profoundly, albeit unintentionally, influence their decision-making processes. When combined with the broad discretionary powers vested in these actors at critical junctures, from the initial stop on the street to the final sentencing decision, these biases can systematically disadvantage racial minorities. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle where perceived criminality becomes disproportionately associated with certain racial groups, thereby justifying more intensive policing and harsher penalties, further entrenching the initial disparity. Therefore, to suggest that the system is merely experiencing isolated incidents of bias is to ignore the deeply woven threads of racial inequity that compromise its claim to provide equal justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Reed and Mr. Chen, for your opening remarks. The issue of racial disparities within our justice system is undeniably serious and demands our unwavering attention and rigorous analysis. However, I must respectfully diverge from the assertion that the system itself is inherently or structurally founded upon racism. While no system operated by human beings can ever be entirely devoid of individual biases or errors, the foundational legal framework of the United States justice system is, by its very design and explicit intent, colorblind. Its core tenets aspire to the equal application of law to all individuals, irrespective of race or ethnicity. This principle is enshrined in our Constitution and numerous statutes. The disparities we observe, which are indeed concerning, often arise from a complex confluence of multifaceted societal factors that extend far beyond the confines of the justice system itself. For instance, there are strong correlations between these disparities and prevailing socioeconomic conditions, such as poverty, lack of educational opportunities, and limited access to healthcare and stable employment in certain communities. Furthermore, differential rates of involvement in certain types of criminal activity, as documented by crime statistics, also contribute to the disparities we see in arrest and incarceration rates. These are uncomfortable truths, but they must be part of an honest discussion. To attribute these complex outcomes solely or primarily to systemic racism within the justice apparatus is to oversimplify a deeply intricate problem and, critically, to overlook the agency and responsibility of individuals. It is also crucial to acknowledge the significant progress that has been made over decades. We have seen substantial legal and procedural reforms aimed at mitigating bias and ensuring fairness. These include enhanced training for law enforcement and judicial personnel, the development of sentencing guidelines, and the robust work of civil rights organizations and defense attorneys in challenging discriminatory practices. Therefore, while we must remain vigilant in identifying and addressing any instances of bias, it is inaccurate and counterproductive to characterize the entire system as fundamentally racist.
Ms. Miller, your emphasis on a, quote, colorblind legal framework is a common refrain, yet it conveniently sidesteps the demonstrable reality of disparate impact. Laws and policies that appear neutral on their face can, and frequently do, disproportionately harm minority communities. Consider the war on drugs, for example. Enforcement strategies, particularly for crack versus powder cocaine, historically led to vastly different sentencing outcomes that predominantly affected black communities, despite comparable rates of drug use across racial lines. Similarly, mandatory minimum sentencing laws, while ostensibly objective, have removed judicial discretion in ways that have disproportionately incarcerated minorities for extended periods, often for nonviolent offenses. You also point to socioeconomic factors as external to the justice system, but this perspective fails to acknowledge how these very factors are often the direct and enduring consequences of centuries of systemic discrimination. Redlining, discriminatory housing policies, unequal educational funding, and employment discrimination have systematically created and maintained conditions of disadvantage in minority communities. These conditions, in turn, can contribute to higher rates of street crime and thus greater interaction with the justice system, a cycle directly fueled by systemic racism, not independent of it.
Mr. Chen, while the historical context you provide is undeniably important for understanding societal inequities, an overemphasis on past injustices can sometimes obscure the complexities of our current realities and the genuine, substantive efforts towards reform. It risks creating a narrative where the system is perceived as static and irredeemable, which I believe is not an accurate reflection of its ongoing evolution. Furthermore, attributing all observed disparities in the justice system exclusively to systemic racism is, in my view, a significant oversimplification of a multifaceted issue. Such a singular focus can inadvertently undermine public trust in the vast majority of dedicated professionals within the justice system: police officers, prosecutors, judges, and public defenders, who strive daily to uphold the law fairly and impartially. It may also divert attention from other crucial contributing factors that require distinct and targeted interventions, such as addressing addiction, mental health crises, and the breakdown of community support structures. If we are to make meaningful progress, we must be willing to engage with all contributing elements, rather than assigning culpability to a single, albeit significant, historical and societal force. A nuanced approach is essential, one that acknowledges shortcomings while also recognizing the system's capacity for self-correction and improvement.
Mr. Chen, your arguments compellingly outline the depth of systemic issues. If we accept this premise, what specific, actionable policy changes do you propose? How could such changes meaningfully address these embedded problems without inadvertently compromising public safety or the fundamental tenets of due process for all individuals?
Dr. Reed, comprehensive solutions are essential. Key policies include ending cash bail for nonviolent offenses, which unfairly penalizes marginalized communities pre-conviction. Establishing independent civilian oversight boards with genuine disciplinary power over police misconduct is vital for accountability. Mandatory, rigorous implicit bias training for all justice personnel, with data tracking its impact, is also necessary. Finally, reforming sentencing laws, such as eliminating mandatory minimums and robustly investing in diversion and restorative justice programs, would enhance fairness and public safety by tackling root causes.
Ms. Miller, you acknowledge documented instances of racial bias. even if these are not deemed systemic by your definition. How can the justice system more effectively address and rectify these occurrences to ensure greater equity for all?
Dr. Reed, bolstering transparency and accountability is crucial. This means strengthening internal affairs and ensuring judicial conduct commissions are effective. Improved, disaggregated data collection on judicial and prosecutorial decisions can reveal subtle patterns of bias. Continued investment in practical, behavior-focused bias training for all personnel is also key to fostering a genuinely fair culture within the system.
Ms. Miller, you place considerable emphasis on the ideal of a colorblind legal framework and the adequacy of current anti-discrimination efforts. However, if these measures and the system's purported colorblindness are genuinely effective, how do you comprehensively account for the stark and persistent racial disparities that continue to plague virtually every stage of the justice process?
Mr. Chen, a colorblind framework is an ideal we continuously strive for. Anti-discrimination measures are part of that ongoing improvement, not a final solution. Persistent disparities often link to complex societal problems like poverty and unequal opportunities, which originate outside the justice system itself. While the system must combat internal bias, it cannot alone resolve these broader societal inequities. That demands a wider, multi-sector effort. Mr. Chen, while I concur that addressing disparities is of paramount importance, I am concerned about the potential ramifications of an intense and perhaps singular focus on, quote, systemic racism. Does such a focus risk inadvertently absolving individuals of personal responsibility for criminal behavior? And could it potentially alienate the many dedicated professionals working diligently within the system to effect positive incremental change?
Ms. Miller, recognizing systemic racism absolutely does not negate individual responsibility. We must hold individuals accountable, while also dismantling systemic forces that unjustly funnel certain groups into the system. Highlighting systemic problems aims to empower those within the system by providing a clearer understanding of the obstacles, enabling more effective change, not to alienate them. Confronting uncomfortable institutional truths is essential for genuine reform, not a matter of sparing feelings over achieving justice. To conclude, I must firmly reiterate that systemic racism is not a historical artifact, but a deeply entrenched reality within the U.S. justice system, as evidenced by its historical lineage, persistent statistical disparities, and the pervasive influence of implicit bias. Superficial adjustments are insufficient to address this profound challenge. What is urgently demanded are comprehensive, structural reforms designed to systematically dismantle these embedded inequities. Such reforms must include a radical reevaluation of our punitive approach to nonviolent offenses, substantial investment in community-based alternatives to incarceration, and the establishment of robust, independent accountability mechanisms for all justice system personnel. Furthermore, we must actively work to demilitarize policing and ensure that sentencing practices are fair and proportionate, free from racial bias. The path towards a truly equitable justice system is undoubtedly arduous, yet it is a moral imperative. Our nation's creed of liberty and justice for all rings hollow, as long as race remains a pivotal determinant in an individual's encounter with the law. Therefore, let us summon the collective courage and unwavering commitment to forge a system that genuinely reflects fairness, equality, and justice for every citizen, without exception.
In my concluding remarks, I wish to reaffirm my position. While the racial disparities evident in our justice system are a matter of serious concern that demand our sustained attention and diligent effort, it is inaccurate to assert that the system itself is fundamentally structured by racism. The challenges we face are profoundly complex, stemming from a wide array of societal factors, and they necessitate nuanced, evidence-based solutions, rather than wholesale condemnation, which can erode trust in dedicated professionals. We must continue to uphold the principle of individual accountability for criminal actions, as this is foundational to a safe and orderly society, while simultaneously accelerating reforms to enhance fairness and transparency. Many such initiatives, focused on improved training, data analysis, and community policing, are already underway and showing promise in mitigating bias. Crucially, addressing the root causes of crime through robust community investments in education, economic opportunity, mental health services, and addiction treatment is paramount for long-term change. Let us champion constructive approaches that support both public safety and community well-being, fostering collaboration rather than promoting divisive narratives to achieve a system that is both just and effective.
Mr. Chen, Ms. Miller, I extend my sincere gratitude to you both for your exceptionally insightful and vigorously argued contributions to this profoundly challenging discussion this evening. Your distinct perspectives have powerfully illuminated the intricate complexities of whether systemic racism is embedded within the U.S. justice system, highlighting the many valid points and deep convictions on both sides. We trust this debate has provided our audience with substantial food for thought, and we encourage continued informed reflection on this critical societal issue. Thank you for joining